See you. Okay.
Got it. You're now being live streamed. Are you about to take me to my YouTube?
Yay.
1 second. Okay, we're going.
Okay.
We're going. We're rocking. We can just chill. I'm gonna delete some of this when I'm done. I just want to get this oop and running. I gotta mute.
I know. I was like, which thing do I mute again?
Jesus Christ. Mute the live video so I don't get that freaking reverb. How's everything else been? Don't say anything you don't want to say on live. We can just chill. I'm gonna
delete. Everything else has been fine. I feel like when you're sick, it's just so for everyone, if anyone is listening already, I had COVID like last week or 2 weeks ago. I feel like when you're sick, it just takes over everything. There's like everything's through the sick filter.
Yeah, that's I can't. I know what you mean. Like it's legit. It's the sort of lens that everything pushes through. But do you find that maybe like sometimes, I don't know, I find in my experience usually if I'm not feeling great, that I'm usually relatively present. Like I'm not.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I feel like, well, because it makes you like, I feel like we just go through life and we're like used to our body, like we're working in a certain way. And then if it stops working in that way, then it kind of does like force you to like experience things differently and like be more present. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Like I feel like it just calls attention to everything. Like when you are actually a little bit sick. What's up, Instagram? We're live on YouTube right now with your spiritual friends. Please click over for the live show on YouTube. We're gonna answer questions on there, but up until that point, we're just gonna rock and roll. But yeah, click over to YouTube. The link is in the comment section. I don't really remember how to put the link in like my conversation starter thing, but there is a link in the comment section. First comment, boom. Or you can just click on my bio and see the YouTube link to get it. So cool. All right. What up, man?
I feel like while I was sick, so I guess, being sick, part of like what was happening was I was like feeling like I was tripping. And I was like watching all this TV. I was watching Love Island, First Kill. Have you heard of that?
No.
Show? Okay, it's on Netflix. It's like a teen drama, like coming of age, vampire and vampire hunter.
I auditioned for that. I know what you're talking about.
You did?
I did. Yeah, I remember that. I remember that script. I was more excited than the critics have been of that show. So.
Oh, are the critics not into it? I like love it.
I'm sure I'm gonna love it. I was really excited when I read the script, to be honest. I was game. So
I feel like what I've been really loving lately is like all of these like teen coming of age dramas that all like center like gay kids or gay couples like in them instead of heterosexual couples, which I'm realizing are just like so boring now because like we've seen like every heterosexual like dynamic, like there's just such a template, for like heterosexual relationships like with teenagers and adults, but I feel like with gay couples there's just like more possibility or something. Like I don't know what it is, but I've been like really into it. That and then Heartstoppers, which I watched a while ago, is also with just like I think like all the main characters are gay. I think there's maybe like a trans girl on it too, which is cool. Like I'm just like loving all like the essentially like non-cis, like non-straight storylines. But and then I was watching something else. But when I was watching First Kill, so it's like vampire, like and other monsters, but they talked about Lilith, which is what we're going to talk about today. And I was like watching it when I was like in this COVID weird mindset, and I was like having all this like spiritual awakening just like from watching this like TV show where they were talking about Lilith. I'm sure not in the way that Lilith is. Well, I don't know. Like I didn't really know anything about Lilith other than this show and also True Blood. They talk about Lilith too. So like I
Yeah,
only know her in like a vampire context.
makes sense.
Do you want to go
Yeah.
straight into it or do you want to talk like about how you're doing?
No,
Sorry.
no, no, no. I we can go straight into it. You brought up Lilith, and I immediately got curious because I've been really exploring Adam and Eve a lot lately.
I
Like
know I texted David like right when I was like, what do you know about Lilith?
I legit, it was literally perfect timing because I'm working on this lecture about how the creation story really points you in the direction of kind of how your ego forms in Adam and Eve and that whole bit. And so when you sent that to me, I immediately got curious about Lilith because I'm like, if people like people don't really get Adam and Eve, they
Yes.
really don't get Lilith. I mean, like Lilith has got to be like, right? Like
Yes.
if Adam and Eve is confusing, Lilith is the most confusing thing. And so it really did lead me down a rabbit hole. I know I crap. Oh crap. Oh crap. I was like, I know I sent you a book that I read. And I'm about halfway through the book. And I know I sent you a lecture on it as well. But yeah, both of those initially really my first sort of inclination was I knew Lilith was like a feminist icon. Like that was my first sort of intro. And so that was kind of the lens that everything was being pushed through. And it really kind of made me super curious about everything. So, anyways, yeah. So Lilith lit. That's kind of the jumping off point for that. For me, I
Yeah.
was yeah.
Did you know her in like a vampire context as well? Like, had you heard of that? Like, did you know right away when I said, like, did you know she
Oh,
was part of Adam and Eve?
yes. So
Okay.
I'm a big fan of anime. And one of my favorite animes. Okay, the book that I read is called The Book of Lilith by Barbara Black Koltov. Um, anyways, so I'm a big fan of anime. And in anime, there's a really famous anime called Neon Genesis Evangelion. And it's like essentially the new gospel. It's a really deep Kabbalistic retelling of like everything, but told from the sort of lens of like teenagers fighting in big robots. But it's
Okay.
like not chill. But in it, they call all of the humans Lilin. It's because of Lilith, and they kind of descend from Lilith. And so I was familiar from that context, and then also vampires because I was a big vampire nerd like growing up as
Okay.
well.
And so like Lilith has been part of vampire lore for like a long time.
I don't know,
Okay.
maybe,
Well, since you were
possibly.
a kid, at least. I mean,
Yeah.
because the first time I had heard of her, I think was in True Blood, which I can't really remember the story, but I feel like there was an element of her being sort of I can't remember if I'm mixing this because in First Kill they described her as like the first vampire. Like there was like Adam and Eve and Lilith. How they described it was Lilith didn't shy away from Eve from the snake's bite. Like Eve was scared of the snake and Lilith like let the snake bite her and then she like became a vampire. That was
Oh
like
God.
their origin story,
Tight, tight.
which but which made me think of I wonder if this will like actually tie into like actual Lilith things. But it made me think of this psychedelic trip that I had when I was 22. It was like the only like bad trip that I had ever had, and it was really bad. And it kind of started because well, what was happening like in my head during the trip was I was like really resisting everything that was happening, and I was like trying to force things to happen that like weren't happening. And
Mhm.
like I would be like, well, I want to go like hang out with that person. I was like in a big group or whatever. And I kept like wanting, yeah. So I was like trying to like control the situation, which like is always bad, but when you're on mushrooms, like extra bad, I guess.
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
um and it kind of started so we were in Maine and there were all of these mosquitoes, and um I was like fascinated by them. Like they were like landing on us and just like biting us. And for whatever reason, it like wasn't really bothering me. But everyone else kept being like, we need bug spray. Like I hate these mosquitoes. So I kind of like got into this mindset where I was like, I was like going against my like curiosity and like fascination with these mosquitoes where like they weren't bothering me. Like I wasn't having judgment about them. And but then everyone else was, so I was like, oh, I shouldn't like them because like everyone's like saying that they're bad, kind of. So it kind of reminded me of this like dynamic where they're like, oh, like Eve wouldn't let the snake bite her. Like Eve was like scared of the snake, right? That's like all of the people I was with. And then Lilith like let the snake bite her. And then I was like, well, I was kind of like letting like I wanted to like let the mosquitoes bite me because I thought it was like cool and like weird. And then and it also like brings up this Adam and Eve thing about like the judgment and like good and evil, right and wrong, whatever, judgment, polarity, that is like so ingrained, I think, like in that story. And so it kind of made me think, like, look at Lilith as this like this like energy of like radical acceptance, kind of.
Yeah.
Does that fit into like I know, I mean, like, the way I went into that is like kind of like random and weird, and like through my own like weird random personal experience, but like is that like, does that fit into like what you started to discover with how she fits into Adam and Eve and stuff?
Yeah, actually, kind of. Yeah, and I love how you said like I know the way in wasn't like the cleanest, but that was where you landed, like exactly that. Yeah, I think my experience. I'm gonna be honest. When I read the first couple chapters of that book, I was like, oh, makes sense. And it also sort of makes sense why why people haven't, why Lilith didn't catch on, right? Why that was kind of like kicked out of the story, as it were, because she's essentially the energy of the thing that's being kicked out of the story, right? This divine feminine energy that's like unseen, unknowable, a mystery. It's like, yeah, of course, like they're like, yo, I don't need this. And so in the book, they talk about, those are markers. In the book, they talk about how Adam, in the beginning, it was Adam and Lilith, and they were together. And it says Adam had an intercourse with Lilith and all the animals. And I thought that was a really, really powerful, interesting take, because it says that, this happened in this very sort of holistic, Edenic state. And then there was a split, there was a separation. So Adam and Lilith are one thing, essentially. But they're having an intercourse, they know each other, but with everything else. And what it immediately like brought up for me was the sort of Edenic awareness of being, right? Pure, like everything is here. I'm having an intercourse with everything in my experience. It's absolutely whole.
I was having intercourse with the mosquitoes.
Exactly. Right? Like everything we do is like is a coming together in that way, right? A pen is like, me and the intention, and then what we create is the thing that we're, whatever. And so and then there's a lot of stories, there's a lot of Lilith stories, like there's a lot of Lilith stories. But the first bit that I read was talking about how Lilith made the mistake of uttering the name of God, and also was Adam wanted to be above Lilith, and so Lilith was like, no, we're the same, and she's like, nah, y'all can eat a dick. And she also uttered the name of God, and then so she was like, I'm out, like is what I got. And so from that, what showed up for me initially was like, oh, this feels like the first sort of fracture of the psyche. The first, we drop into life and it's all whoosh, one thing. we're whatever, we're here, whatever. But the second we go, that's something and that's no thing, we split from Lilith, right? Lilith pieces out because when we conceptualize something, the name of God, when we take something that's unknowable and we perceive to know it, to like holy, we've created a something separate from no thing. And so Lilith is expelled from the garden as like, now it's like the example I like to give is like a child becoming fascinated by something in its experience, right? Everything's one thing when I'm a kid, and then mommy gives me this and I go, huh, that appears to be something. Well, because of the sort of fascination of the constriction of consciousness, this, I am more curious about what this is than I am about everything that it's not. That doesn't exist. There's only things. So it's almost the Adam masculine attachment is immediate conceptualization with an ignorance of like all of everything that it's not, in the mystery and the anima and the divine feminine.
So that's like interesting, right? Because I feel like part of the Adam and Eve story that's also really important is like Adam names all of the animals and stuff. Like he's like naming everything. And then you're saying like, and then Lilith names God.
Oh yeah.
But then she gets kicked. But then, okay, like I'm trying to wrap my head around like why I guess like one would get her kicked out. I mean, I think I like what you're saying. Like, I feel like this thing of the splitting of the, right, the splitting of the oneness, like this into individuality or individuation, like that seems like it's such a big part of, and I actually never thought of Adam naming animals or like naming everything as creating that individuation. I was just like, oh, he's just coming up with names for the animals, but that is like a more like spiritual or what I don't know the word, but like way of like perceiving it, or like a more, yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't know words.
They're useless. No, I'm just kidding. They're useful. Yeah, same. I will say this, and this is something I've also sort of like to explore, because the challenge here, and the thing that I see showing up more so here in all sort of spiritual things, is like not only the personification, but the identification with these personas as like physical beings and not archetypes.
Yeah.
Which I think creates two sort of glaring, confusing things, which is the first being Lilith's a woman, Adam's a man, Eve's a woman. Mm-hmm. They're not. They're 100% archetypes. And the second is the illusion of time. Because when there's solid human things and Lilith is this thing, all of these things seem to happen in over a timeline, but these things are all happening instantaneously, right? So the second that we land, it goes from no thing to, or it goes from everything to no thing and something. We have two, Lilith and Adam, they split. Boom. Now, this is usually from the desire to sort of grasp at the somethingness, right? And so when that happens, Adam is like, nah, I want to dominate. Our conceptual mind wants to dominate Lilith. And so the conceptual wanting to dominate the non-conceptual, which understands itself to be equal to the conceptual, pieces out, right? I'm done. If we put Lilith to the side for a quick second, now that Adam's running the show, the only thing he can do in order to create balance in his life is to immediately create a conception for the non-conceptual, Eve. So from Adam comes Eve, because now Adam is like, I'm not Adam and Lilith, I am Adam. I have created a solid thing for myself. I am something. So everything else that isn't me is no thing, Adam and Eve. So now he's only conceptualized himself. Like Adam and Lilith, that Adam is not the same as the other Adam. One is kind of this Edenic wholeness. The other one is an egoic conception. Because the second Lilith leaves, we create ego. That's a masculine Adam, the Eve, the feminine, and the non-dual kind of middle of that, right? And so we've conceptualized Adam and conceptualized Eve, something and no thing, and now we split the world up into pieces with language. And so that's the knowledge of good and evil. And now we have a full-fledged psychological ego, and we're expelled from the garden.
Yeah. Okay. This is like so interesting because I think one of the things that I have been finding so interesting and trying to like research Lilith, because like I don't really know anything about her, is that it's really hard to like see her outside of, like, it really brought attention, like, sorry, what am I trying to say? It really brought like attention to how much these texts and how much of like just the world we like are getting only through perception. So like, because Lilith is represented a lot as like something to be feared. And so I think anything outside of that concept, because that concept and that ego is like so comfortable for us as humans, and that's like how we're used to like experiencing the world, that of course like anything outside of that or different from that like would be like, could be scary, like, or could be filtered through a lens of fear. And so it's interesting to like study like any of the Bible, I think, because of interpretation, because like obviously we can like go back to the text, but I think a lot of times like we go to like how it's been interpreted, and we like hear the stories told to us over thousands of years. So we're like getting that, like, like with Adam and Eve, for example, such a good example. I know like you and I like are both like love that story because we feel like it's been so distorted and used for different purposes, because it's been filtered through this like patriarchal lens, through like just through these like lenses that have become so like ingrained in our society. It's like that's the only way that we can see it. And Lilith the same, but like since there isn't as much text about Lilith, it's like harder to get at like what is that actually saying about like the human experience. And so yeah, I just like I think it's so interesting to like, yeah, just everything that you said. I feel like it's like I'm glad that we're having this conversation because I feel like it's like,
oh
yeah, like
same.
matching and like helping me like understand it better too.
I'm very curious, like, so like the bits after that, because Lilith pops up fucking everywhere. Like there's a Lilith in a Gilgamesh epic. Like there's a constant sort of, they in the book, she also kind of paints Lilith over to the story of Persephone getting pulled into Hades, into hell by Hades, whatever, the underworld. And which I think is really interesting because Lilith kind of gets a bad go of it, as you see, but it makes absolute sense because Adam is dominating our consciousness. Our egoic sort of conceptual mind is dominating our consciousness. So something that's unknowable seems horrifying to us, right? Like, like I can't conceptualize this thing, so it's like it must be evil. It's this kind of unknowable thing, and by and large, the ego treats the thing that's unknowable like it's evil.
Yeah,
right. It's like anxiety. It's like,
totally unknowable, and I think uncontrollable is like part of that too, because especially because I think she represents sex a lot, like, or to like there's like that quote or whatever that's like, a man cannot like sleep alone because like Lilith will come and like essentially make him have like a wet dream, I guess. And like that fear of like, like through whatever lens that was like written or thought about, was clearly like maybe a monogamous or like there was definitely like cultural things. That's not like a pure like human experience. Like that's there's clearly like fear and cultural expectation like in that sentence, I feel like.
I think so. Definitely. It definitely seems like there's a, well, and see, the thing is, the challenge is because the book that I sent you is like, it's very like, I think it might have been the book in like back in the day that was essentially became the sort of feminist masterpiece because of how women definitely like identified, and she identified women with this energy that's archetypally feminine, but not supposed to be literally a woman, right? We all have the problem. Like we're all the thing, but by kind of co-opting that into that energy, it was really interesting to also see that obviously, like it's just very obvious to me that the sort of egoic first, childish, patriarchal identification would naturally kind of be like, oh yeah, no, fuck all that. But, and also just genuinely sort of misunderstand Lilith as this sort of wild thing that can't be controlled. I don't want anything to do with that. But in a lot of ways, for me, she represents this sort of kind of truthful coming home. Like once we've sort of kind of pulled together the whole Adam and Eve bit and the God bit, the ego, and we're like, oh, right, I'm not the physical body thing, and I'm also not any of this stuff. Like once you kind of drop into a more direct experience of your life, it's like Lilith shows up again, right? Now you are one with the mystery of the present moment, because I don't know what the fuck's gonna happen here. To the point that you said about the sort of lustful thing, I had this really interesting thought the other day, which was that in a lot of ways, Lilith kind of represents the sort of holistic space, right? Adam is the constriction, the structure things. Lilith is kind of like everything. And so it seems to me that a lot of what desire is pointing in the direction of is Lilith. Like all desire is pointing us in the direction of, because that's all we want, right? We want to be limitless, because we are limitless and we know ourselves to be limitless. And so we are, the only thing we're ever actually striving for is limitlessness, which is Lilith. Lilith is limitless possibility.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, so Lilith like represents that limitlessness, and then Adam kind of represents that bound by time, by space, by bodies, by that individuation. Yeah. He's a certain, like maybe like the top level of like, and so that's interesting. We like went down the Adam line or whatever, like you said earlier, like Adam, Eve, whatever comes from kind of focusing on that, and like I'm just repeating essentially what you're saying, but yeah, and kind of ignoring Lilith. I like that you said early on like Lilith didn't like catch on, which is like so funny. But yeah, like what would our like whole, I mean, I guess we would just be like floating in space if we like only say we like did the opposite and like pushed Adam away and like only went down the Lilith line. Like
I think we will see, and then I think that's really interesting though, because it definitely seems to me that the ignorance of Lilith is caused us a lot of fucking problems. Like that's really the issue. And that's why it kind of comes off as like evil, and they said she get killed all these men and so on and so forth. All the babies. It's not right. It's not because Lilith is bad. It's because we are ignoring, like she in a lot of ways points out the dysfunction of not living in a state of harmony with everything around us and what will happen, right? What is natural desire for limitlessness is turned into lust, is turned to like, I lust for something to make me whole, instead of knowing yourself to already be that which you desire. And so
I feel like it, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Like, I feel like it also points to like the fear of death, like with killing men or killing babies. It's like, we're so bound by like our, you know, favor for life and our fear of death. And like, there's no, like the transcendence of like those two spaces is like also something that's totally outside the realm of like most people's conception and like, you know, desire to like even pay attention to that. You know, it's just like we're so stuck in like these certain conceptual ways of thinking about things. Yeah, and you're right, like Lilith kind of just points to everything that we've ignored or that we've pushed away or decided is bad. It's almost like like everything that's like good versus evil. Like she's just taken on this, like whatever we've prescribed as evil, like she
Ooh,
kind of like takes that
yeah.
on, and like Adam, I guess, like takes on the good. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's why Adam and Eve were expelled. But then I'm thinking, well, why was Eve expelled from Eden? I mean, why was
Okay,
Lilith
so
expelled from Eden?
hot take, because we're all expelled from Eden. So hot take is Adam and Eve are just egoic constructions.
Right.
Like in truth, they're all just one thing, right? They're all
Right.
just one thing. But Adam and Lilith, cool. Oh, let me also answer your question. Adam and Lilith, one thing, right? And then Lilith gets kicked out, right? And then from Adam comes Eve. Eve falls for the serpent, and Eve gets with Adam, both get ejected. First to your first point, right? Lilith gets ejected because children, because that's what we do. Kids don't walk around and go, air, ooh, mystery, ooh, nothing, right? We don't do that as children. We grasp. First things kids are doing is grasping at concepts, at something that we can touch. And so Lilith being kicked out isn't a matter of like, get rid of the women. It's literally just a child cannot conceptualize that which is not conceptual when they are barely understanding concepts. They're literally learning how to separate their world into pieces. When they popped in, it was all one thing. So the first thing they're going to grab is something. Lilith is gone. She doesn't exist.
Because she's the first to conceptualize something, you're saying?
Because it's literally like when you jump into, like if you land in Earth, baby, right? Baby, you're blind, essentially. Right. You have no point of reference for anything in your experience. It's all just kind of blah, 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 blah. The first thing that we do, right, as kids is we find something to grasp at.
Right.
And we don't know this is a pen, right? But we are aware that it is something at some point, and it seems to be different than some other thing. So now we've essentially become Adam. We said something, structure, constriction is the thing. And we've completely ignored nothing, not out of like, I'm afraid of mystery and blah, 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 or like women suck, but out of the childish understanding that I don't even know that exists.
You're saying like almost like to Adam, she was like expelled from it. Like she was outside of his own like conceptual.
It's outside of our own conceptual understanding. We can't understand Lilith, right? Like we literally can't understand mystery, the unknown. And the second we create a concept around it and say, okay, the second after you go, oh, this is pen, Lilith is expelled because you also at some point go, this is not pen. This is not something. Gone. Whoosh. I've conceptualized it. Lilith has uttered the name of God. Rather, we've wrapped a concept. It's like Lilith is a divine feminine archetype, but in order to conceptualize that, we have to put a circle around it. Right. But it's not really a circle. It's really limitless. But so that we can hold it and say, it's Lilith, we conceptualize it as a circle, and that goes. But then Adam, and we've all taken the path of Adam. Like we're all about the sort of material, the literal, the egoic space. But then Eve simultaneously is Adam's creation, right? That's our egoic creation. Lilith was just what happened.
Yeah.
After that, we go, okay, wait. Now there's something and nothing. There's a me. Oh, that's a new Adam. That's Adam. Oh, okay.
The first sense of identity. Right.
Right. Adam. Oh, yeah. Okay. I am Adam. Tight. I'm bored. I need some stuff. There needs to be, oh, right. There has to be nothing. If there is something, immediately Eve is created. something and no thing, right? Before it was completely unconscious. After we land in, and it's like identity, oh, okay, me, not me. And then from that sort of space, we start cutting up the world into languages, into little bits and pieces. And Eve eats from the fruit. That was always, we fucked that up so hard.
Well, okay, wait, actually, oh my gosh, this just gave me an idea, which is, I feel like Eve is like the concept of Lilith, because like, right? Like maybe that's exactly what you were going to say, but like Eve eating from the apple is like that same idea where we're like, oh, so sinful, like she went against the rules, she's not obeying, which is like, I feel like how we've conceptualized Lilith as well, as like, oh, she's a rebel, she's not doing the thing that like Adam wanted her to do, or like that's like the way that we conceptualize that like feminine energy or whatever. But it's like, yeah, that's not Lilith, but we only know to look at Lilith through the lens of how we look at Eve, because we only know like the Adam Eve like line or whatever. But it's like still has that bit of like, oh, Eve went against the rules, Eve did this thing wrong, like she's bad.
I saw a TikTok and this guy was like, emotional. He's like tried to make this, it was a fail, but it was like an emotional intelligence video, right? And he's like, see, emotions are bad because they're not logical. And I'm like, there we go. Like,
that's
he's like,
what I used to write in my diary when I was like 16.
Stop! Right? People think that. We thought that. We were like, oh, don't be emotional. Logic, form. We got to know things. And it's like, he's like, you can't be emotional and intelligent. I'm like, my guy, what are we doing? But that's what we do. Huh? I
said, where has he been living? Like, I feel like that's like not even like, that's not even like in right now.
Right, like where you got internet. I think he was trolling. He didn't have a lot of followers. I was like, man, you just trolling for the internet. You messing with us because everybody knows this is weird. Stop.
That's really funny. What you were saying earlier also reminded me. So I looked at this other book, Embracing Lilith, by Mark Williams, and he was saying, I think it was that book. He was saying like he wanted to write about Lilith for like a long time. Like he was always like was this in the Book of Lilith? Okay, it was in one of those two books. Those are the only two books I looked at. But they were saying like they were like, oh, I wanted to write about Lilith for like a long time, but every time I tried to put words down, she would like escape, essentially, which is kind of like what you were saying too. Like this person who was like trying to write about her, like could not bring her into form through like the word, because she just like is formless, like you were saying.
That's so cool.
So that was interesting.
That's so fucking cool to me. Yes. And it's so interesting because like, I would say the impulse for the one woman to this Barbara, I think was her name, writer, to talk about Lilith and the concept or the context of Persephone, I thought was super interesting, getting pulled into the underworld as well, because a lot of the time, that's really what we're trying to do, is like grasp at Lilith. We're trying to say that this is definitely it. I know for certain, right? We want to take something that's unknowable, like God, like ourselves. Like, I know that I'm a body. I know that I'm my thinking. I know. And then we essentially, and like, I love I think nope, not going to say that. Nope.
But so curious about what you were going to say.
Nope. Oh, yeah. Well, I said I love thee, and then I realized where I was going to go with that. I was like, that's not a soundbite that I want existing anywhere. But
hey, I said I was having intercourse with mosquitoes earlier, so.
This is true. I will say, okay, I was going to talk about the idea of the sort of how, because the idea is that, Hades takes her to the underworld against her will.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, that's what we do when we attach, our identity to a concept. We grab something that's beautiful and unknowable and can only be experienced in real time, right? Life the beauty of Persephone, of Lilith, of the unknown, of the holistic experience of life can only be experienced without, in its fullness, without us essentially having it be obscured by the ego, right? The identity of me and not me and something over there, or Adam and Eve and so on and so forth. And so when we try to grasp it, it's like we take it against its will. We're like, oh yeah, it's seeing a beautiful rose and just experiencing the rose, and then trying to grab it and say, oh, I know why this rose is beautiful. That doesn't make any fucking sense.
And trying to possess it too. I feel like there's an element. Well,
Absolutely.
I've been thinking a lot about this. We don't have to go into this like in any kind of like big way, but like this is like colonial energy, right? It's like going into something and wanting it without just being with it or understanding it. You just go and you're like, I see this and I like it and I want it and I'll take it. Kind of like that's like the whole like problem.
That's the energy of it. And I'm glad you brought that up, because you did say earlier about like, I wonder what it looked like if we like went down the Lilith path. And I think it's really supposed to, like, I think the fact that it's even discussed in this way is weird, but I think it's very natural to go down the Adam path initially. But I think that's kind of the point of sort of people for years, forever, having initiations into the unknown, because we see indigenous cultures all over the world in harmony with with everything, because they're aware that they aren't limited to this sort of limited physical identity. But I think having an initiation into a mystery, which is what indigenous cultures also always did forever, is part of that reintroduction to Lilith, right? I'm gonna put you in a cave. You're gonna deal with something that you can't conceptually even understand why or how to get out of. And you're going to have to say yes to the unknown. And we're going to have to teach you that in real time, which connects you to how life works.
Yeah, which is like also comes back to like the original, like the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Like the assignment of good and evil is like such an inherent part of the fear of the unknown, because it's like, well, we don't like the unknown because maybe something evil is going to come from it, or like because we wouldn't care about the unknown if we just were like everything's good. Right? Like this is kind of like how like comes back to my mushroom experience, where it was like, I was just kind of like in the present moment, like experience everything like as I was experiencing it. And then it was like, oh, judgment, oh, mosquitoes are bad, oh, we need bugs, we need to protect ourselves from them, like that getting inserted like just messed me up completely, kind of, like all of a sudden it was like, oh, I don't trust my presence. I don't trust my, like the way that I'm really like relating to the world and like experiencing and engaging with it. I am like starting to be like, oh no, I need to like assign, this is good, this is bad, I need things to go this way, I don't want things to go this other way, and like start to like create all those things. And it's like, well, that's just like incomplete resistance and like negating reality essentially, which is like extremely painful.
Amen. I just think that's the nature of struggle, is that sort of specific kind of delineation. And to my experience, that kind of the part of kind of growing up is learning to see those things as it's just stuff, right? This may be painful, but it is, you know what I mean? It's not good or evil or good or bad. We're kind of putting that to the side. And in my experience, it's kind of the epitome of putting away childish things is what you said, which is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Like I just
Wait, what is the verse?
When I was a child, I thought as a child and I did things when I was as a child, but when I became an adult, I put away childish things. And for me, that always comes back to that sort of initiation into the sort of mystery of life, and saying yes to this moment without editing it or filtering it through an identity of a body or of thinking or of an emotion or of a past or of a future, and kind of lining it, feeling into the direct experience of life.
I mean, what's interesting, I think, is that when we are really just directly experiencing life, like the struggle and the pain and all that, like essentially like disappears because it just becomes sensation. Does it like there's a certain, I mean, I'm trying to think of like, yeah, I don't know. I read a book once that was like talking about pain and like death and dying, and they were kind of saying like when you accept the pain and when you just like feel it, like really feel it, it like almost starts to like dissolve, and it really does just become, I mean, I'm not someone who deals with chronic pain, so I don't want to like
Mhm.
speak on behalf of that, but like even just like being sick and being like, oh, I'm, having this like sore throat or whatever, or I'm having this like sinus stuff. It's like, yeah, I'm in resistance to that because I don't want to be experiencing that, but that's what's causing the pain. And if I'm just like, oh, this is just like my experience right now, it like becomes less painful because I'm just in the experience. I'm not trying to make it go away. I'm not trying to change it. I'm not like comparing it to like when I didn't have that experience,
Mhm.
which I think is like really where like so much of the like pain and suffering like comes from.
Right. We literally turn Lilith into a monster. Like it's just this thing that I don't
Yeah.
know shouldn't exist. They're bad. I'm terrified of it. I'm terrified of the unknown. And it's really cool to me to see us. It's because all the stories end up like as Adam's like coming back to Lilith. Like all of us they all in kind of in this sort of cyclical thing. Oh, and I saw a TikTok the other day, which honestly was something that I can honestly say I never actually considered, but it made complete sense to me because I've always been kind of iffy on the book of Revelation in the Bible because it's my experience that like it's way too symbolic. Motherfuckers they can't get like, Jesus walking on the water, like symbolism behind that. Revelation is just like straight symbolism. It's horrifying if you don't really have a kind of different eye for things. And so I've always been kind of meh on Revelation, but I saw this theology dude who was talking about the book of Revelation, and he said, Revelation goes backwards to creation. I said,
Oh.
shut the fuck up. It's literally the story of going back, like through the Bible, all the way back to the Garden of Eden. So it becomes a circle in the Bible. And I was just like, yo, it blew my mind. But I'm like, and I read it, and I was like, yeah, like the book of Revelation, the last book in the Bible, kind of circles back in, but it all kind of goes back to the Edenic state, which really I think is a great example of sort of that sort of starting as this thing and then going boom and kind of coming together and then dropping out and then coming together. And then you kind of get to the end, but it's really just the beginning again. It's this continuous sort of
That's so
flow of,
interesting.
yeah, I thought that was cool.
I don't really know like the text. So the book of Revelation, is that where Jesus comes back during Easter?
Okay. So it's essentially a dude having a revelation on an island about like what's coming. People see it as talk about the second coming of Christ, and it's where all the stories of Jesus coming back and people getting tossed into a lake of fire and the mark of the beast. All of that shit is in the book of Revelation.
Okay.
And it's essentially this revelation from on an island or whatever. But there's so much like contextual stuff from the culture that you have to kind of understand to read it, but also symbolically, if you aren't like a numerologist, if you don't understand the deep occult symbolism of Revelation, it's just, I mean, that's why for the longest time, people would tell me like growing up, it was like, the mark of the beast is going to be a microchip in your hand. I'm like, that sounds not correct. It was always very weird to me. It's like, don't want to, and like every so often, there's always like, I think it was the vaccine at one point, that's the mark of the beast, that's the new mark of the beast. I'm like, what are we doing? So I've always kind of hated on Revelation, but
yeah. I mean, that really comes back to like, it's like the entire way that we like interpret everything is like through whatever the lens of like our own concept is, like our own concept of like things to be scared of, things to think are bad, things to think are good. Like I'm just like, God, everyone has such a different, way like they have like different puzzle pieces in there or whatever, like creating those things, and we're just like interpreting like actual reality like always through that. I always like, I'm just like, how do we even like speak to one another or like have conversations ever, or like I don't know, with yeah, and especially in like a religious context, because all these things are just like so charged and like can be interpreted in so many different ways.
I had a call yesterday and I was talking to my friend about this. But so the sort of underlying more esoteric truths, the truths that like that all of the religions and spiritualities have kind of come to, that kind of bar, we probably talked about this. I found that when you speak from that space, you don't discredit people's experiences, first and foremost, right? I don't have to invalidate your experience to express where I'm coming from. And if I assume that the person is really, even if they are saying like, you know, like interracial dating is bad because this verse says don't be unequally yoked, even if they're saying the most random shit, if I speak to them from here, they're gonna show up for it because they can't help but go in that direction. They're like, oh wait, yeah, oh, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I'm like, yeah, I feel like that's what you're kind of getting at, right? It's like this. And they're like, yeah. And like, it's so tight to watch somebody be like, really kind of, this is a thing, or they're like talking at you in fucking concepts. And they're like, concept. And you're like, well, this is my experience with it. But I totally get that kind of challenge of everybody kind of having their own subjective experience, right? Like, who fucking knows?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point of like, pointing to, yeah, what is my actual experience, and like, oh, have you had any experiences like this, and like bring it, because when we're in concepts, we're like in our mind, we're in like our idea of things, but when you come back to like, yeah, but what is it actually like to be alive, like what is it actually like to like have a relationship, or to have like whatever the thing is, it's like, yeah, then you can like, we're all sort of having like somewhat of a similar, I guess, like experience. It's like only our minds that are like creating something different, I guess.
I love it. It really kind of balances the polarity of that, right? Like, because conceptually things can exist polarized in our mind, good and evil,
right?
Good, bad. I like this. I don't like this.
Right.
Experience, like,
totally.
It decimates concepts because it's like, okay, but like, I think like, isn't that like the thing? Because we're all so sort of polarized right now, but I feel like when we actually speak, when we do this, it's like, oh yeah, that's kind of like what I'm dealing with. It's like, do you really care about that concept that you were like dying 10 seconds ago? Nah, man, I'm just trying to feed my family. Exactly that.
Totally.
Question, thoughts, ideas. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
I was just saying, like, yeah, like dying on the hill of a concept is like a funny thing to do. But obviously, a lot of people have done that. But it's so it just like makes no sense. Yeah, and people are so into like, yeah, I guess it's just like this atom thing. Like we've just gone so far down the atom shit. I
was about to say the same thing. Yeah.
We can't get out. We're like so into atom.
We really have, it's a conceptual fascination with atom, with things that we think that we can know, to the point that like, I mean, there's really no bottom to that, honestly. I did a video recently where I talked about sort of how the sort of egoic fascination, the conceptual fascination will even wrap itself around like spirituality. And like, I'd gotten a few comments because I'd done some sort of non-dual videos and people were like, yeah, you're the observer, you're the watcher. And I'm like, yes and no. Like, cause
I know, I'm always like, what do you mean when you say things? Like, that's like what people are always like saying things. And I'm like, but what does that mean to like, recently I feel like there's been a lot of people being like, well, I don't believe in like one God or whatever, but I'm like, but what does that mean when you're saying that? Like, what are you thinking of when you're saying one God? And then what are you thinking of when you're saying I don't believe in one God? Like, what? Like, I don't know, like in all of it I'm just like, but like we all just assume that we like are saying words that we understand understand, and we're like almost never saying words that we understand.
Sarah, when I literally tell you, I had this exact same conversation with Jake 2 weeks ago.
Really?
I literally were on the thing. I was like, but like, what the do you mean though? Like
Yeah.
you said it, like we're on the same page. We are not. What do you
Yeah.
mean when you say you don't believe in God, or you think that this is what the fuck do you mean? Well, no, I don't. Be
Yeah.
precise. Like
Yeah, and I feel like that's something I've been really trying to do. Well, not really, but a little bit trying more to do is like be really like, especially when I say something that's maybe like a buzzword or like just something that's been said a lot as like a phrase. Cause I feel like once something becomes a phrase or like a buzz, it's just like totally meaningless. I'm like, I have to really like hone in and be like, what am I saying here? Like what do I mean precisely when I'm like using this phrase? Like, what does it mean to me?
right? Like, what's your experience? I think that's the other thing that you hit on earlier was like, don't talk to me about your belief. I don't care. Like, that's cool, but like, because belief doesn't require your experience or involvement in life. I can say I believe, Bugs Bunny is the best comedian in the world. It fucking doesn't matter. Like what's my life, what's my lived experience is a completely different thing. But I think once again, I've talked about this before, but like I think our attachment to belief is just one that's born out of childhood and the necessity for belief, right? Because when we're kids, we don't have the life experience. We have to take everything on belief, but we don't necessarily always put away childish things and forget that like everything in our experience are just little concepts that we made up along the way.
Totally. And we're like even if we have like two experiences and then we like, what's the word that I'm looking for? Like magnify it to, I forget the word that's not coming to me, but like when we like have two experiences and then we're like, oh yeah, that must be the way that it is. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like
yes.
we're not real, like we're also, yeah. I mean, from like a practical level, like it makes sense to do that. And like probably a lot of times like things do follow patterns and whatever, but it does really close us off to like the unknown. And it's hard to tell, it's like when does that serve us for like efficiency, and like when is efficiency like even a goal versus like when does it serve more to be like to be more open and to like let those things go and to like let something new reveal itself to us. And I feel like that comes back to like every self-help thing like ever, where it's like, yeah, we're all living these lives, because it's always like, why does one person end up with like this type of life, or why do they make these types of choices versus this other person's making these other types of choices? And like a lot of that I think comes down to like concept and like how do like what do we think is possible, what's our experience, like what do we think we should be afraid of versus not afraid of, like how willing are we to take risks, or like what kinds of risks are we willing to take versus like not. Like I was thinking recently about like, I don't remember why I was thinking about this, but something like, if someone's from a family where it's like they just take a lot of risks and they like work out or whatever for them, it's like then we grow up thinking, oh yeah, risks are safe to take, versus someone whose family never takes risk or took risks that didn't work out or whatever. And then it's like that's how we think about things.
Yes, 100% that. Yeah, man, that's I guess the rough part, which is why I think maybe to your first point, I feel like we always like dovetail into practice. And I feel like the experiential practice of all of this shit is the only thing that can, because I find to be the biggest problem in spirituality is the attachment to the understanding of a concept and thinking that that's the same as the experience of what that concept is pointing to, which is Lilith, right? The experience of it is not the same. And so when people are like, well, how do I do that? When I try to do that, then it's because we treat these sort of concepts like being the observer, being the watcher, being mindful as the whole bit. It's like, when I take this mindfulness pill, my life will be perfect. And it's like, no, the experience of a mindful practice will very quickly reconcile the silliness behind that idea, right? I'm all right. I'm going to be mindful when I do the dishes. Immediate first thought. Oh, wait. Okay, I'm back. Right. And so you eventually sort of end up developing, when you start taking more care to actually practice, not sort of dwelling in this sort of hyperconceptual space, I feel like you do develop a sort of like, oh, right, now's a great time to use the old noggin and really think this through. And and also notice the difference between thinking that like consciously and then unconsciously just letting the chatter go and just moving through your life as this sort of, oh yeah, completely disconnected, self-obsessed thinking, ego, and that shit. Those are completely separate entities. But I think it only really balances itself, like you said, in experience and in practice, which is why you can talk about it all we want. Like, what's your meditation like? What's your life like, fam? Like, what's your how present are you in your life? Yeah.
And like that's why I love, and maybe like also maybe why you love story so much too, but I think like why I love story, like I love hearing what does that actually like look like to you. Like I want to hear like what is this other, even though it's probably not going to match totally mine, but like I like to hear like what are other people doing. Like I want to hear like the details of like, okay, you're, I don't know, like say someone like was, you know, got into some career or whatever, and it's like, okay, I'm seeing them now at like maybe this pinnacle. I'm like, but how did you get there actually? Like what actual actions did you take? What was your mindset actually? Like what are all these things that like aren't being talked about that are maybe going to be like more helpful? Like what resources did you already have like on your way there? Like what are the like what's the actual experience of getting from like point A to point B for someone? Or like, yeah, what is mindfulness? You know, you could say like, oh, just be mindful, but it's like, yeah, but what does that actually mean? Like, what does that actually look like?
Exactly.
Like, you know, and talking about like, oh, it's like really paying attention to like the tactile feel of the water and like the temperature and the like really kind of like naming everything. So you're like, okay, yeah. Because if someone's like never done something like that, it's like, how do they know what that even means? Like, oh, meditate or be mindful. It's like, I don't know what that is. Like I've never.
You literally like pointed out the importance of my experience of why we need gurus, honestly, like actual like lived gurus, because I think that really does kind of help. And as useful as it is to have like a book or whatever, the guru is this. It's a lived in like relationship with something, someone who is like mirroring this idea that's in your head conceptually. And also kind of the second you grasp on the concept and you're like, oh, you mean it's like this? The guru's like, no. Like they're like here, and like pushing along, but also not giving you too many concepts to attach to. And that's something that I think is a push-pull that people don't really understand how to make by themselves a lot of the time. Right? We'll get really deep in a concept and think that our understanding is experience. It is not. And there's nobody around to be like, you're full of shit. So usually what happens is our lives fall apart. Like we've spiritually bypassed everything and then everything falls apart. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess I didn't know as much as I thought I did. And so for me, you know, I think it's really important to kind of have anybody to kind of check you and to help you. But I love what you said about the precision of it, like being able to kind of actually sort of explain it. For me, it comes down to like intention, like clarifying your intention outright and not getting caught up in these sort of entertaining aspects of spirituality and therapy and self-help and any of this shit.
This also kind of reminds, well, first I know you did like a call for questions.
Oh yeah, I think somebody,
is there anything you want to talk about?
Somebody said, recently found out the way that we feel precisely can assist us with describing what it is that we believe. It's still a concept, but clarity of how you feel and you can express it can give you better understanding. Yeah, absolutely. Right. I think so. And that,
like
and that's
just, no, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that's that push pull sort of between where do these like labels and concepts help us versus, and then like, because usually it's like when we're in like nothingness or we're like not able to sit, we're just like having experience and we don't know what to do with it. It can be really helpful to like create concepts around something, but then inevitably it will become confining as a label.
Exactly.
And so it's like this
Yeah.
constant like letting go, which kind of comes back to this like Adam and Eve. It's like, it's not that we don't need Adam, like we do need that concept, like that is part of life, but it's like, can we kind of oscillate back and forth when we need to between like the light and the Adam. Exactly.
I think for this experience too, like this person's comment and what you said also points in the direction of the you know, I feel like one of the biggest challenges I have over the whole spiritual bit is like the idea of a hierarchy or stages of it. And when you sort of see these sort of stages of development, I think one of the biggest challenges, right, as you're a kid, you come in and it's like, you know, there's chaos. It's just chaos. And so being able to sort of express your emotions and express these things is taught to children theoretically so that they can communicate. And it's really useful. And also when who you think you are is still your body, your thoughts, your emotion, past, future, whatever, it becomes increasingly important to be able to communicate from that space. But the challenge is, like you said, like eventually it's going to let us down. That identification with emotion, the identification with thinking, the identification with the body is going to at some point let us down. And so allowing that process to kind of happen naturally and to be honest about where you are in that is really important, I think. And I think it assists in that sort of push-pull aspect of going, okay, right? Does it no longer serve me to think of myself as this label? Where are the limitations I've imposed on myself by giving myself this label that I made up initially?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like I got like I feel like we always come to that part, but yes, like it does serve a purpose. Like I don't want to underplay that either. Like it does serve like it's helpful to be like, oh, I'm feeling angry, or like, oh, I'm feeling, this way because of like this and this and this. Like sometimes it is really helpful to like be able to identify it and then to let it go after you're done.
Useful abstractions is the phrase that Adyashanti uses.
Useful abstractions. I like that. Was there anything else from anyone watching?
I didn't think I saw any. No. Any other thoughts, questions, something anybody want to throw in the
room? It reminded me of like what you were saying earlier about like, I think about like the guru. I feel like my part of my brain is like missing, but like the guru stuff or like the concept versus like experience. I saw this I went to this music show that was this guy who he played violin, and there was an opening act. This was like such a funny experience for me. So the opening act was this guy who was like rapping. He like clearly just had some kind of like spiritual awakening and was like very much in his concept about it. And it was like so annoying to me. I was like judging really hard, but like it just felt really preachy, and I just felt like he didn't really like have the, I was like, why are you preaching to me? like you don't really have the experience. Like I could tell that he was like young in his awakening or whatever, but he was like very taken by it, obviously, and like really wanted to share his message. And it was very concept, like, because all of his songs were like very, I mean, they were like pretty good, and he did some like freestyling that was good. Like, I don't want to say it was bad, but it was like, it was just very conceptual. Like he was like, let me explain how like we're all one or whatever. And then the next act I was there to see was this violinist who does like improvised violin songs with like a thing where he like loops. So he's like, every song is like new, like for every concert he like just goes in and starts going, and it's like all just like this awesome like, and he would kind of talk about his experience, like he would play a song and then he would kind of like talk a little about his experience, and he's like, oh yeah, like I used to play violin and I was so structured about it and I had no fun with it, and but now he's like, you can tell he's so free. And it was like such an interesting juxtaposition, because like the first guy was so in his concept about spirituality and like the oneness of everything, and then this guy was like emanating it just in his energy, and he would like play these songs, and then he would just like the second he would stop, like finish his song, he just would sort of burst into like laughter and glee and like joy and like smile. It was just like emanating from him. And you could just tell like he's had so many years of just the practice of becoming like more authentic to himself, becoming more like in tune with like his own, you know, rhythms and his own creativity and like all of that. And it's like we were kind of just getting that sort of like flow experience from him rather than him, you know, coming and being like, let me tell you about this. Let me come to your door and sell you a Bible, like type of thing, you know?
Yeah, we don't like it when people take away our choice. It's kind of antithetical to the flow of nature. You got to bring people in, give them a choice. That's a challenge. You really made me think of like the sort of usefulness of both of those things. But I guess because I honestly, I mean, obviously, like the conversation we're having, I lean in that direction, right? I lean in the direction of conceptualizing the non-conceptual a lot of the time. And I always like to like, because I admire, like my wife is the opposite, right? Sam's like, she's just doing it. That's just what she does. And a lot of the people in my life are like that. And so I really admire that. But I also like, I know there's a usefulness that, like for what kind of the way that I do things. And I think accepting that is kind of why we're having this conversation right now. Is like, oh, okay, like this is I had trouble. The quick story of this is my acting coach is very much like, do it, you'll figure it out. And I had a tough time with her in the beginning because I'd always try to grasp at what she was telling me. I needed someone to kind of give me the underlying concepts of it so I could kind of understand it for a second before I could let them go. Yeah. And so that was my experience. And I had a different acting coach give me that. And so then when I the concepts go, I was like, okay, I can come back and let it all go with you again. And so, you know, like you said, I mean, there's space for everything, but I love that opening space, man. When you get all the information and it all makes sense, it's the best.
I mean, I feel like the way that you like present information too, and like the way that you talk about things, like I feel like you bring people into like the thing that you're trying. You know what I mean? Like I don't feel like when I watch your videos and stuff, like, and when we like have these conversations, I don't feel like you're like telling me concepts that you like thought of. You know what I mean? Like, because it feels very alive, I guess. Like I think that's part of what it is too. Like it kind of also, now I'm just like having all these memories. Like I had this friend in college who we studied abroad together, and he just got like really into crystals. So he was just like, take this crystal, like you need this crystal for this thing. And he was very much like, again, like in this like newness of his spiritual awakening and like wanting to share it. But you could tell he was like outside of it, because there's something that happens when you start to conceptualize things where you're like removed from it. It's like that living energy isn't there anymore. It just becomes like this sort of like dead concept. And so I feel like but like my experience of you is like when we're having these conversations and like when I watch your videos and stuff, like the living energy is there, like when you're talking about it. It's not like a concept that you read that you're like now communicating, or something that you thought of before that you're now communicating. It's like there's still life there is like the only way I can describe it, which I feel like is sort of like with this concert too. It's like the life was really there with like the guy that was playing violin, whereas like with these other songs it was like a little bit removed, like the guy was just kind of like talking from his concepts that he had already thought of, you know.
That's very kind. And it's not
You're
always
like, no, it's just concept.
No. It's definitely not always that. And I will say, I think my propensity, I think for whatever reason, this body's leaning towards speed. Kind of like I get there and be like, no, this isn't it. I just sprint fast. Like I just like, nah, no, like, and so, but I definitely, yeah, I think also another thing actually that made it really a little different for me as far as grabbing those concepts a little too tightly was the inherent feeling that I don't know anything. I'm like, I don't think, like, it can't be this. Like, I can't be.
no. And like seeing the people who I really looked up to and being like, okay, yeah, this thing that I'm doing isn't that. And I really like this. I want to, whatever this is kind of the space that we want to move to.
Yeah.
And folks like you, I think also, I mean, like for better or worse, I don't want to get too manifesty, but like, I feel like every person that has been in my life and my spiritual journey has been exactly correct. Like when I stopped making it about what was wrong with them in the world, and I started asking myself what's right about them that I'm not getting, it just like from you to everybody else, it felt like I was just living in like, I just was surrounded by living examples of everything that I like claim to give a shit about. So anytime I was off myself and saw them, I was like, oh, well, I can just fucking do that. Like, yeah, Sarah's about like, look at these plants. Yeah, I'm gonna just do that. Like, I'm gonna just do that. My wife, my fucking acting coaches, Natasha, like everybody. I'm just like, oh, right. Just be here. That's enough. And so I just think I was very, very lucky with the folks I had around me, have around me in my life right now.
Yeah, totally. And I feel the same. Like, I feel like I have like so many people that always like help me bring it back to like, even the other day I texted my friend and I was like, I need these like lingering COVID symptoms to go away. And she just goes, need LOL. I was like, can you just let me have this?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, that's a phase. That's a real phase that people, it's so interesting, right? So like you start off and you're like completely unconscious of your language. And then you learn the sort of how your language and how you perceive things is like a big deal. Like, and so I think we get very sort of like hesitant, like, oh, I just don't know if I can do that. I mean, I don't want to say can, because like I know the universe is like that weird shit.
Say the right thing or the universe won't know what I'm asking for.
Right. I don't want them to know that I'm a bad person. And then like, but then on the other side of it is usually when it comes back together, it's like, I don't know, fuck. You don't care because you're like, no, I know. Yeah, no, I know. And sometimes it can dip into the careless, but by and large, I find that the folks, and there's also just honestly, and here's the difference, I think for me, is there's a different level of precision. You're not thinking about it. You're not trying to make sure you do the right thing. It's just when it becomes a living expression, it's like the Sadhgurus of the world, where you're just like, yo, just, he'll give you the whole cookie in like a sentence if you're paying attention. And there's just no sort of place for the polarity to bounce. But he says shit that people would definitely be like, that's whatever. He's like, oh man, this is bullshit. And people are,
but that comes back to like that living energy, right? It's like, what's the energy that's living through the words, not like, what are the words like saying themselves? Like, I feel like in a lot of like spiritual teachers or whatever, like that I listen to or whatever, they'll be like, don't like listen to my words, like listen to like what's underneath the words. And it's like, yeah, that's because when you get so, we already talked about this, but like, yeah, when you get so caught up on the words, it's like you're missing the thing, you're missing the energy beneath them. The living energy is what they call it.
Can't get rid of Lilith. And I think that's a great place to stop, Sarah. Thank you. Fuck yeah, man. You can't ignore Lilith, man. Lilith is a bad bitch.
We should write our own book called You Can't Get Rid of Lilith.
Can't get rid of Lilith. Stop trying. She's here to stay. Please. We all got to marry Lilith. It's important. But yeah, man.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for rocking with me. Thank you for having me in the midst of your COVID situation, man. That's intense.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Glad you're feeling better. Thanks for everybody for hanging out on Instagram and YouTube. And this will just be up on YouTube. We're hanging out. And yeah. Cool beans.
Bye.
Have a good night, guys. Bye. How